Reverb made a documentary about pedals. I'm not sure why. So all jokes aside, Reverb has made a documentary about pedals. There's a link down below if you would like to purchase that movie and check it out. They've also sponsored this video so I can do a 5 things video. So of course, I watched the movie 3 times because I liked it that much. I'm going to show you a clip right now that inspired the video.
The 1970s, they introduced the op amp, which allows for kind of almost more sequential operation in terms of the current flow, where you have guitar, hits op amp, then gets EQ'd and then sent out.
So why did this part of the movie speak to me and make me want to make this video? Well, it's because a distortion pedal is actually my very first pedal. My very first pedal ever was a DoD American Metal, and I'll tell you why that was important to me at the end of this video. But right now we need to talk about distortion pedals and the 5 best moments in history they've created. And for this video, keep in mind, we won't be talking about fuzz pedals or overdrive. We're talking about distortion pedals. Now first, we have to talk about pretty much one of the very first ones, the MXR Distortion Plus. It was used by Jerry Garcia, Randy Rhoads, Iron Maiden, and it's not famous and important in history just because some great guitar players used it. So why is the MXR Distortion Plus so important? Well, because when this pedal came out, a lot of players didn't have amps with master volumes. So a lot of players were in bars and places where they couldn't crank those amps. Distortion pedals gave players the ability to have great sound at any volume. Some of us didn't have more modernized amplifiers. They had older amplifiers that couldn't even achieve those kinds of sounds that we were trying to get. So the distortion pedal pretty much changed that for a lot of players. And that brings us to number 2, the Rat pedal. This pedal came out in 1978. Unlike the other pedals before it, like the DoD 250, the Gaiatone Zoom distortion box, and of course the MXR Distortion Plus, this pedal had a little bit more control of the EQ, a little bit more interesting tone, but more importantly, man, did it sound great not only by itself in front of an amp, just using it for its own distortion, it sounded great putting it in front of an already overdriven or distorted amp and boosting it over the top, used so many times in so many albums. It's a great pedal that's obviously inspired a ton of clones after it and modifications, and you can see why it has to make the list. Now, if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, 1978, how could you not mention the DS1? That brings us to number 3, the DS1. The DS1 also came out in the late 70s, about 78, and like the Rat, it's very inexpensive and has been used everywhere. And again, not only as its own distortion box, but of course in front of an amp that's already overdriven or distorted. It's also been credited as the longest running production pedal in history. It's also inspired what we know today as the modern boutique pedal or boutique pedal builder. This one I have right here to my left was modified by Robert Keeley. Brian Wampler, Robert Keeley, Josh Scott, so many people have modified the DS1s and sold us kits on how to modify our own DS1s. It's a fantastic pedal and it deserves a place in the history of distortion boxes. And that brings us to number 4 and the year 1988. Not only a great moment in distortion box or distortion pedal history, but what is credited as one of the first amp in a box pedals, the Marshall Governor. This pedal not only was a great sounding distortion pedal, it was one of the first pedals that promised to make any amplifier sound like a great Marshall amplifier. Not only is it credited with being the first amp in a box pedal, it really set a storm of amp in a box pedals. We have companies like Wampler who made the SLO and the Plexi amp in a box. Then we have companies like LPD who did the 68 and 87 pedal that not only are a Marshall in a box, but they're actually designed to sound like a specific year that a Marshall was made. Pedal Pal FX does some of the best Marshalls in a box I've ever heard. There are so many amps in a box all the way up to MXR and the 5150. This is a great moment because of the fact that not only does it give players who can't afford those amplifiers a taste of that amplifier, it also gives players who have those amplifiers a way to take those in a portable way. And that brings us to number 5, the early 90s and the Boss Metal Zone. The Metal Zone has to be mentioned in a great distortion box history video. The reason is because it's one of the top selling pedals in Boss's history. It's also one of the longest running pedals in their history that went unchanged. Until the Waza craft, it was an unchanged circuit. It just stayed the same way. Sure, they made all kinds of pedals like the digital metalizer and the heavy metal, but the metal zone holds a place in a lot of players' hearts. Not only is it revered as one of the most made fun of on YouTube, it's also one of the ones that people say is the worst sounding, but then there are bands like Biffy Clyro who play a Strat through it and it sounds fantastic. It's a pedal that has to be taken seriously, even though it's never taken seriously. Right now, there are scads of trolls ready to comment about how wrong I am for mentioning this pedal in a great distortion box history video. But to be honest with you, this is a pedal that I don't think of as being that great, yet I still own one and use it pretty regularly. Pete Thorne did a video where he explained that you can use the EQ to make a cocked wah sound to get that Michael Schenker tone. How fantastic is that? So it had to make the list. Now I know that leaves a gap. There's a few years before then and now, but to be honest with you, like a lot of things in the music business, there's a lot of great pedals. There's just not a lot of new innovative pedals. A lot of what we see is a lot of throwbacks to what there was before and a huge variety of that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to hit the things that spoke to me. These are the moments I thought in history that were interesting with the distortion box. Now I promised I would tell you why the DoD American Metal was so important to me in my life. It's because my first amplifier had basically treble, bass, and volume, and that's it. It didn't have a gain control and it had no way to make distortion. I learned that if my friend came over and we both plugged in the two inputs and we turned the amp on 10, we could get distortion and I could play the music I loved. However, if he didn't come over or we couldn't turn up that loud, we could never get that sound. One day I was in a music store and I asked if there was something that would give me that sound, and they had a used American Metal distortion pedal for $39. So I bought it. I can't say it was a great pedal. I can't say that I still to this day love it. But what I can tell you was it was the first time I had distortion on demand, and it sounded great to me at the time, and it let me continue to play and make the sounds I wanted to. And that's what these distortion pedals do for all of us. They allow us to have the sounds we need at the prices we can afford. Before I go, I want to mention that in the description down below, there are links to other videos that you can watch that are inspired from the documentary that Reverb did. And I got to tell you again, it's a great documentary. I highly recommend you check it out. Again, I put that link in the description. As always, I want to thank all of you for spending some time with me today. Till the next time, know your gear.